The blood on her dress had dried to a rust-brown stain that matched the color of the Kansas prairie in late summer. And Penelope Owens knew she could never wash it clean no matter how hard she scrubbed. She stood at the edge of Hays City with nothing but the clothes on her back, a single carpet bag that held 2 threadbare chemises and a tin cup, and the weight of everything she had lost pressing against her ribs like a physical thing. The dress itself had belonged to her mother once, taken in with rough stitches after the cholera took her, then let out again when Penelope grew taller, then taken in once more when food became scarce. It had never fit properly, hanging loose at the shoulders and tight across the hips, the hem dragging in the dust because her mother had been shorter and there was never enough fabric to fix it right. The wagon train had left her behind 3 days ago when her uncle finally drank himself to death, and the wagon master said he would not slow down for a lone woman with no family and no money to pay her way. She had watched them disappear into the western horizon while she buried her uncle in the hard ground with her own hands, the blisters breaking open and bleeding before she was halfway done. Now she walked into Hays City with the August sun beating down on her head and her stomach empty, except for the handful of wild plums she had found that morning. The town sprawled along the railroad tracks like something that had been thrown together in a hurry and never quite settled right. False-fronted buildings lined the main street, their paint already peeling from the harsh prairie winds. Cowboys and buffalo hunters crowded the saloons even in the afternoon, and the sound of a badly tuned piano drifted from one of the establishments. Penelope kept her eyes down and walked quickly, aware of the stares that followed her, aware of how she must look with her ill-fitting dress and her dark hair coming loose from its pins. She needed work, and she needed it now, before nightfall, before she had to figure out where she would sleep. The general store owner took one look at her and shook his head before she could even ask. The hotel manager laughed outright when she inquired about washing dishes or cleaning rooms. By the time the sun started sinking toward the horizon, panic had begun to claw at her throat, making it hard to breathe. That was when she saw the man loading supplies onto a pack mule outside the trading post. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun behind him. His hair fell past his collar in dark waves that looked like they had been cut with a hunting knife, and his beard was trimmed close to his jaw. He wore buckskin trousers and a homespun shirt with the sleeves rolled up over forearms that were corded with muscle. And when he lifted a 100-pound sack of flour and settled it on the mule's back like it weighed nothing at all, Penelope stopped walking and stared. His hands were huge, scarred across the knuckles, but he tied the rope with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his size. She must have made some sound. Or perhaps he simply sensed her watching, because he turned his head and looked directly at her. His eyes were a startling light brown, almost gold in the fading sunlight, and they moved over her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. But she held his gaze because she was desperate and she had nothing left to lose. "You need something." His voice was deep and rough, like he did not use it often. "I need work." The words came out stronger than she felt. "Any kind of work. I can cook and clean and sew, and I am not afraid of hard labor." He studied her for a long moment, those strange gold eyes taking in her stained dress, her worn boots, the way she swayed slightly on her feet from hunger. "You alone?" "Yes." "Where is your family?" "Dead." She said it flatly, without emotion, because if she let herself feel it she would break apart right there in the street. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of what might have been sympathy or understanding. He turned back to the mule and checked the ropes again, and Penelope felt her heart sink. He was going to walk away just like everyone else. She was going to have to sleep in an alley or worse, and tomorrow would be even harder than today. I have a cabin up in the hills about 2 hours northwest of here, he said without looking at her. I was planning to winter there before heading into the mountains proper come spring. I could use someone to help with cooking and mending and such. I can pay in food and shelter and a little coin when I sell my furs in the spring. Penelope's breath caught. You are offering me work, if you want it. He finally looked at her again. But I will tell you straight that it is isolated up there. You would not see another soul from now until spring thaw, most likely. And there will be talk in town about a woman living alone with a man, even if we both know nothing improper is happening. I do not care about talk. She stepped closer, afraid he might change his mind. I accept. I will work hard, I promise you that. He nodded once decisively. Name is Liam Keller. Most folks call me Keller. Penelope Owens. Penny. You eaten today, Penny? The kindness in the question nearly undid her. She shook her head, not trusting her voice. Liam Keller's jaw tightened. He finished securing the last of his supplies, then gestured toward the hotel. Come on. We will get some food in you before we head out. The hotel dining room was crowded with railroad workers and cowboys, but Liam Keller walked through them like they were not there and found a table in the corner. Penelope sank into the chair gratefully, her legs trembling now that she had stopped moving. When the server came, Liam ordered steak and potatoes and bread for both of them, and coffee so strong it could strip paint. The food came quickly, and Penelope had to force herself not to fall on it like an animal. She cut the steak into careful pieces and chewed slowly, even though everything in her screamed to eat faster. Across the table, Liam ate in silence, but she could feel him watching her, measuring her in some way she did not quite understand. How long since you ate a full meal? He asked finally. 4 days, maybe 5. She broke apart a piece of bread, savoring the soft white inside. There was not much food on the wagon train, and after my uncle died, I had no claim to any of the supplies. Your uncle, the one who got you into that dress. She looked down at the blood-stained fabric, shame heating her cheeks. This was my mother's. The blood is my uncle's. He fell and hit his head, and I tried to stop the bleeding, but... She trailed off. When did he die? 3 days ago. Liam was quiet for a moment, his big hands wrapped around his coffee cup. You buried him yourself. There was no one else. He nodded slowly, like she had just passed some kind of test. You will need different clothes for the cabin. It gets cold up in the hills, and that dress is not going to keep you warm when the wind starts blowing. I do not have money for new clothes. I will take it out of your wages. He stood up, pulling coins from his pocket and dropping them on the table. Finish eating. I will get what you need from the trading post. Before she could protest, he was gone, moving through the crowded room with surprising grace for a man his size. Penelope sat alone and ate the rest of her meal slowly, letting the food settle in her stomach, trying to understand what had just happened. A few hours ago she had been alone and desperate, and now she had work and food and a place to stay for the winter. It seemed too good to be true, and a small voice in the back of her mind whispered warnings about strange men and isolated cabins and all the things that could go wrong. But what choice did she have? Stay in Hays City and starve, or trust this mountain man who looked at her with those unsettling gold eyes and spoke in that rough, careful way? Liam returned carrying a bundle wrapped in brown paper. Got you some wool trousers and a couple of flannel shirts. They will be too big, but you can roll up the sleeves and cuffs. There is also a coat and some thicker stockings. Thank you. She took the bundle, feeling the weight of the fabric. I will pay you back. I know you will. He tilted his head toward the door. We should get moving. I want to reach the cabin before full dark. They left Hays City as the sun touched the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of gold and red. Liam walked beside the pack mule, his long legs eating up the ground at a pace that Penelope had to work to match. But she did not complain, just hitched up her too long skirt and followed him northwest into the gathering dusk. The land began to rise gradually, the flat prairie giving way to rolling hills covered in buffalo grass and scattered cottonwoods. The air cooled as they climbed, and Penelope could smell sage and wild roses and the dusty scent of the mule. Behind them, the lights of Hayes City grew smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely, and there was nothing but the huge vault of the sky above and the prairie stretching endlessly in all directions. "You ever been out on the land alone?" Liam asked, breaking the silence. "On the wagon train, but there were always other people around. This is different. Out here, you are responsible for yourself. You need to pay attention to the weather, to the animals, to the way the wind sounds. The land will tell you what it needs if you listen." Penelope looked at his profile in the fading light, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes scanned the horizon constantly. "Have you always lived out here?" "Mostly. Came west after the war, could not stomach being around so many people anymore. Found I preferred the mountains and the quiet." "Do you not get lonely sometimes?" He glanced at her briefly. "But lonely is better than some alternatives." She thought about that as they walked. She thought about her mother dying in the wagon outside St. Louis, about her father vanishing one night and never coming back, about her uncle who drank to forget whatever horrors he had seen in the war until the drink finally killed him. Maybe Liam Keller was right. Maybe lonely was better than some alternatives. The cabin appeared as the last light drained from the sky, a solid dark shape against the hillside. It was larger than Penelope had expected, built from thick logs chinked with mud, with a stone chimney at one end and a covered porch running along the front. Behind it, she could make out the shape of a lean-to for the mule and what looked like a small storage shed. Liam led the mule to the lean-to and began unloading supplies while Penelope stood awkwardly in the yard, unsure what to do. When he finished, he carried the first load of supplies to the cabin door and pushed it open. "Come on, I will get a fire started." The interior was a single large room with a loft above reached by a ladder. The fireplace dominated one wall with a cooking pot hanging from an iron crane. There was a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed built into the wall, shelves holding supplies and tools, and hooks for hanging clothes and gear. The floor was hard packed earth, swept clean, and the whole place smelled of wood smoke and leather, and something wild that Penelope could not quite identify. Liam moved around the space with easy familiarity, building up the fire, lighting an oil lamp, hauling in the rest of the supplies. Penelope watched his muscles flex beneath his shirt as he worked, the way his hands handled everything with competent sureness. When the fire was burning steadily, he straightened and turned to her. "Loft is yours. I sleep down here. There are blankets in the chest under the window. Water barrel is outside, needs to be filled from the stream every few days. Privy is behind the shed." He paused, then added, "I know this is not what you are used to. It is rough living, but it is clean and it is safe. It is better than anything I had yesterday." Penelope set down her carpet bag and looked around. "What do you need me to do first?" "Tonight, nothing. You are dead on your feet. Go up to the loft and sleep. Tomorrow we will work out the routine." She wanted to argue to prove she could be useful, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a physical weight. She climbed the ladder to the loft and found a mattress stuffed with sweet-smelling grass, a pile of thick wool blankets, and a small window that looked out over the darkened hills. She could hear Liam moving around below, the soft sounds of him banking the fire and settling in for the night. Penelope wrapped herself in the blankets, still wearing her stained dress because she did not have the energy to change, and closed her eyes. For the first time in weeks, she felt something almost like safety. She woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Sunlight streamed through the small window, and when she climbed down the ladder, she found Liam at the fireplace, cooking breakfast on a flat iron skillet. He had already been outside, she could see, because his hair was damp and he had changed into a clean shirt. "Morning," he said without turning around. "There is water warming if you want to wash up, and you should change into those new clothes. That dress is not practical for the work we need to do." Penelope took the clothes he had bought her and stepped outside to the water barrel. The morning air was crisp and cool, with a hint of autumn in it even though it was still August. She washed her face and hands quickly, then changed into the wool trousers and flannel shirt. He had been right, they were too big, but she rolled up the sleeves and cuffs and cinched the trousers tight with her old belt. The fabric was rough against her skin but warm and sturdy. She had never worn trousers before, and it felt strange and somehow freeing to move without skirts tangling around her legs. When she came back inside, Liam looked up and something flickered in his eyes, too quick for her to read. "Better," he said simply, and handed her a plate of bacon and cornbread. They ate in silence, and then Liam showed her around the property. He explained how to manage the fire, where he kept the food stores, how to draw water from the stream that ran about 100 yards from the cabin. He showed her his tools for skinning and cleaning pelts, his traps, his weapons. He moved through it all with an economy of words, explaining only what was necessary, and Penelope absorbed it all like a sponge. "I will be gone most days from dawn until dusk, checking trap lines and hunting," he said as they walked back to the cabin. "I need you to keep the fire going, manage the food, mend clothes and repair gear when it needs it. When I bring back game, I will need help with the butchering and preserving." "Can you do all that?" "Yes." She met his eyes steadily. "I can do all that and more if you need it." He nodded, then hesitated. "One more thing. I know you are used to wearing dresses to looking a certain way, but that dress you came in." He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "I know it does not fit," Penelope said quietly. "I have never had a dress that fit properly. Everything I have ever worn was made for someone else first." Liam was quiet for a long moment. "I can sew," he said finally. "Learned when I was in the army, and I have had to make and mend my own clothes for years now. I could make you a dress that fits if you want, for when you want to feel like something other than a hired hand." Penelope stared at him, this huge mountain man with his scarred hands and his careful way of speaking, and felt something shift in her chest. "You would do that, if you want." He shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "I have fabric put away. Was going to make myself a new shirt, but I can do that any time." "I would like that," she said softly. "I would like that very much." The days fell into a rhythm. Liam left before dawn each morning, his rifle over his shoulder and his traps jingling on his pack. Penelope kept the cabin, cooking meals from the supplies he had laid in, mending his clothes with her careful stitches, keeping the fire fed and the water barrel full. It was hard work, but it was honest work, and for the first time in her life she felt like she was earning her keep rather than being a burden. In the evenings, Liam would return with whatever he had caught or killed that day. Rabbit, turkey, once a young deer that they spent 3 days butchering and preserving. He taught her how to skin and clean the animals, how to stretch pelts and scrape them clean, how to smoke meat so it would last through the winter. His hands were patient when he showed her, guiding hers through the motions, and Penelope found herself watching the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt, the concentration on his face when he worked. On the 4th evening, after they had finished the dinner dishes, Liam pulled a bundle of fabric from one of the storage chests. It was a soft cotton in a deep blue that reminded Penelope of the sky just after sunset. He also brought out a measuring tape, a piece of tailor's chalk, and a sewing kit that looked well used. "Stand up," he said, and there was something almost nervous in his voice. Penelope stood, her heart beating faster for reasons she did not quite understand. Liam approached her slowly, the measuring tape in his huge hands. He moved around behind her and she felt the tape settle around her shoulders, felt his fingers brush the nape of her neck as he measured. His touch was careful, almost reverent, and Penelope held perfectly still, barely breathing. He measured her shoulders, then her arms, the length from her shoulder to her wrist. He moved around to face her and paused, the tape held between his hands. "I need to measure your waist and hips," he said quietly. "Is that all right?" "Yes." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. He wrapped the tape around her waist, his hands not quite touching her, and Penelope could feel the heat of him, could smell the scent of wood smoke and leather that clung to his skin. He marked the measurement, then moved the tape down to her hips, and she felt his breath against her hair, slow and steady. "How long do you want the skirt?" he asked. "Just above my ankles, so I do not trip." He measured from her waist to just above her ankle, his big hands steady and sure. Then he stepped back, putting distance between them, and Penelope released the breath she had been holding. That night, after she had climbed to the loft, she lay awake and watched through the gaps in the floorboards as Liam sat at the table below. He had pulled the oil lamp close and was cutting the blue fabric with careful precision, using the chalk to mark his lines before each cut. The firelight played over his features, highlighting the strong bones of his face, the concentration in his eyes. He worked slowly, methodically, and Penelope realized that this was how he approached everything, with patience and care and a quiet competence that made her feel safe. She must have fallen asleep watching him, because when she woke the next morning, he was already gone, and the cut fabric was folded neatly on the table. Over the next week, Liam worked on the dress in the evenings by candlelight. Penelope would find him at the table after dinner, his big fingers managing the needle with surprising dexterity, pulling the thread through the fabric in small, even stitches. He had made the bodice first, carefully fitting the pieces together, then moved on to the skirt, gathering it at the waist with tiny pleats that would make it fall gracefully. Penelope watched him while she mended his shirts or prepared food for the next day, and they fell into a companionable silence that felt more intimate than any conversation. Sometimes their eyes would meet across the table, and something would pass between them, something neither of them was quite ready to name. "Where did you learn to sew like that?" she asked one evening. "My mother taught me the basics when I was young. Said every man should know how to mend his own clothes." He tied off a thread and started a new seam. "Then in the army I got better at it out of necessity, could not afford to buy new whenever something tore. You were in the war." "Yes." The word was short, clipped, and Penelope knew not to push. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "For what?" "For whatever you saw that made you need to come out here alone." Liam looked up at her then, really looked at her, and his gold eyes were full of something raw and painful. "I saw men die for no good reason. I saw cities burn and children starve, and I saw what people become when they are scared enough or angry enough. I came out here because I needed to remember that the world could be quiet and clean and simple." "Is it simple out here?" It was. He went back to his sewing, but his voice had softened. "Before you came along," Penelope's breath caught, "I can leave if you want, if I am complicating things." "No." The word came quickly, almost harshly. "No, I do not want you to leave, I just meant." He paused, searching for words. "I just meant that having you here has reminded me of things I thought I had left behind." Good things, mostly. Like how nice it is to have someone to talk to. How much better food tastes when you share it. How a cabin feels more like a home when there is someone else in it. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. Finally, Penelope said, "I like being here, I like the quiet and the work and—" She hesitated, then made herself finish. "And I like you." Liam's hand stilled on the fabric. He looked at her across the table, and Penelope saw something kindle in his eyes, something warm and wanting. But all he said was, "I like you too, Penny." 2 days later, he finished the dress. He presented it to her after breakfast, holding it up by the shoulders so she could see the full effect. It was beautiful, far more beautiful than anything Penelope had ever owned. The blue fabric draped elegantly. The bodice fitted perfectly to the measurements he had taken, the skirt full enough to move freely in but not so full that it would drag or tangle. He had even added tiny tucks at the waist and a simple collar at the neckline. "Try it on," he said, and there was something almost shy in his voice. Penelope took the dress with trembling hands and climbed to the loft. She stripped off her borrowed trousers and flannel shirt and pulled the dress over her head. The fabric settled over her body like it had been made for her, which of course it had. The bodice hugged her shoulders and waist without pinching. The skirt fell to just the right length, and when she moved, the whole thing moved with her like a second skin. She climbed down the ladder slowly, feeling self-conscious and beautiful and nervous all at once. Liam stood by the fireplace, and when he turned to look at her, the expression on his face made her heart stutter. "Does it fit?" he asked, and his voice had gone rough. "It fits perfectly." She turned slowly so he could see. "Liam, it is beautiful. I have never had anything this beautiful." He crossed the room in 3 long strides and stopped just in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look up at him. His eyes moved over her face, down to the dress, then back up again. "You are beautiful," he said quietly. "The dress is just fabric." Penelope's breath caught. They stood there in the morning light, so close she could see the flecks of darker gold in his eyes, could count the faint scars on his jaw. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, Liam raised one of his big hands and touched her cheek. His palm was warm and rough with calluses, and Penelope leaned into it without thinking. "Penny," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "Yes, I need to tell you something." He took a breath. "I know you came here because you needed work and a place to stay. I know this was supposed to be just an arrangement for the winter, but somewhere along the way it became something more for me. You became something more." Penelope's heart was beating so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "What are you saying?" "I am saying I have feelings for you. Strong feelings. The kind that make a man want to build a life with a woman, not just share a cabin for a few months." His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "But I will not press you. If you want to stay here just as my hired help, I will respect that. If you want to leave come spring, I will take you wherever you want to go and give you enough money to start fresh. I just needed you to know how I feel." For a long moment, Penelope could not speak. She thought about the weeks she had spent here, the rhythm of their days, the quiet companionship of their evenings. She thought about the way Liam looked at her, the way he treated her like she mattered, like she was capable and strong and worth protecting. She thought about his hands sewing this dress by candlelight, taking such care with every stitch, making something beautiful just for her. "I have feelings for you too," she said finally. "I think I have for a while now. I was just afraid to admit it, afraid it would change things or ruin what we had. And now I am more afraid of not telling you." She raised her own hand and laid it against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. "I want to stay, Liam. Not just for the winter. I want to build a life with you if you will have me." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise, transforming his stern features into something warm and almost boyish. He cupped her face in both his hands and leaned down, and Penelope rose up on her toes to meet him. Their lips touched softly at first, a question and an answer, and then Liam pulled her closer and kissed her properly, his mouth warm and firm and tasting of coffee and promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Liam rested his forehead against hers. "I am not good with fancy words," he said, "but I will take care of you. I will keep you safe and warm and fed, and I will never make you feel like you are a burden or an afterthought. I swear that to you." "I know you will." Penelope wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid strength of him, the way his muscles moved beneath her hands. "And I will take care of you too. We will take care of each other." They stood there in the cabin, holding each other while the fire crackled and the morning light grew stronger outside. And Penelope thought that, for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The days grew shorter as August turned to September and then October. The aspen trees on the hillsides turned gold, and the mornings carried a sharp chill that promised winter was coming. Liam worked longer hours, trying to get as many pelts as possible before the snow started. Penelope helped him with the skinning and scraping, her hands growing more skilled with practice. And in the evenings they would sit by the fire and talk about their pasts, their dreams, the life they wanted to build together. Liam told her about growing up in Missouri, about losing his parents to fever when he was 16, about the war and the things he had done that still haunted his dreams. Penelope told him about her childhood, about her father leaving, about the wagon train and her uncle's drinking and the terrible loneliness of being the last one left. "You are not alone anymore," Liam said one night, pulling her close against his side as they sat together on the narrow bed. "You will never be alone again as long as I am alive. I know." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I never thought I would feel this way about anyone, safe and wanted and like I actually matter. You do matter. You matter more than anything." He kissed the top of her head. "Penny, I want to marry you, properly with a preacher and vows and everything legal. But we cannot get to a town with a preacher until spring, and I do not want to wait that long to call you my wife." Penelope sat up and looked at him. "What are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting we make our own vows right here, right now. Just the two of us and God in the mountains. Then when spring comes, we will ride to the nearest town and make it legal and official. But in my heart, you will already be my wife." Tears stung Penelope's eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "Yes, yes, I want that." They stood together in front of the fireplace, holding hands, and spoke the words that would bind them together. Liam promised to love her and protect her and stand by her through whatever came. Penelope promised to love him and support him and build a life with him in these wild hills. And when they kissed to seal their vows, it felt holy and right and true. That night, Penelope did not climb to the loft. She stayed in Liam's arms in the narrow bed, and they loved each other with a tenderness and passion that made Penelope understand for the first time what it meant to give yourself to someone completely. Winter came hard and fast in mid-November, with snow that piled up against the cabin walls and winds that howled like living things. Liam had prepared well, though, and they had plenty of firewood, plenty of food, plenty of everything they needed to wait out the cold months. They spent long days inside, cooking and mending and talking, and long nights wrapped in each other's arms while the wind screamed outside. Liam taught Penelope how to shoot, how to track animals in the snow, how to predict the weather by watching the clouds. Penelope taught Liam how to make his mother's bread recipe that she remembered from childhood, how to play cards, how to laugh at small, stupid things. They grew together like two trees planted side by side, their roots tangling beneath the surface until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. In January, Penelope realized she was pregnant. She knew before she even missed her monthly courses, knew from the way her breasts felt tender and the way certain smells made her stomach turn. She waited a week to be sure, then told Liam one evening as they sat by the fire. He went very still, his hands freezing in the middle of whittling a new handle for his skinning knife. "A baby." "Yes." Penelope searched his face for his reaction. "Are you happy about it?" "Happy." He set down the knife and pulled her into his lap, his arms coming around her like iron bands. "Penny, I am more than happy. I am thrilled and terrified, and I do not even know what else." He pulled back to look at her face. "Are you all right? Do you feel well? What do you need?" She laughed, relieved by his reaction. "I am fine. A little queasy in the mornings, but fine otherwise. I will need to see a doctor eventually, but not until spring when we can get to town. We will go as soon as the snow melts. We will find a preacher to marry us proper and a doctor to check on you and the baby." He laid his hand gently over her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "God, Penny, we made a person together." "We did." She covered his hand with hers. "We made a family." The rest of the winter passed in a kind of golden haze. Liam became even more protective, insisting Penelope rest more and work less, bringing her little gifts from his trap lines like interesting rocks or feathers or once a perfect bird's nest that he found abandoned in a tree. Penelope felt herself bloom under his care, felt the baby growing inside her like a secret promise of their future. As the days started growing longer again, they began planning for spring. They would travel to Hayes City first to make their marriage legal, then on to a larger town where there would be a doctor. Liam wanted to sell his winter's worth of furs and use the money to buy supplies for the cabin, maybe even lumber to build an addition for the baby. "I want to give you everything," he said one night, his hand resting on her rounded belly. "A real house, not just a cabin, maybe some chickens, a milk cow, a safe place to raise our children." "I do not need all that," Penelope said softly. "I just need you and this baby and a place to call home. Everything else is extra. You deserve extra. You deserve everything." In early April, when the snow had melted enough to make the trails passable, they packed up the wagon Liam had kept stored in the shed all winter and started the journey to Hayes City. Penelope wore her blue dress, the one Liam had made for her, and he wore his best buckskin jacket and a new shirt he had sewn over the winter. The pelts were loaded carefully in the back of the wagon, representing months of hard work and cold mornings checking trap lines. Hayes City looked different in the spring sunshine, less harsh and more welcoming. They found the preacher at a small church on the edge of town, and he agreed to marry them that very afternoon. There were no guests, no flowers, no fancy trappings. But when Liam took Penelope's hand and spoke his vows in that rough, careful voice, promising to love and cherish her for the rest of his days, she felt like the richest woman alive. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher said with a smile. "You may kiss your bride." Liam kissed her there in the small church, with sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of beeswax candles in the air. And Penelope thought that this was what happiness felt like, this overwhelming sense of rightness and joy. They stayed in Hayes City for 3 days while Liam sold his furs and bought supplies. The money from the pelts was more than Penelope had expected, enough for Liam to open an account at the bank and still have plenty left over for everything they needed. He bought fabric and thread, tools and nails, a real cradle for the baby that had been carved from smooth pine. On the 3rd day, they traveled to a larger town called Salina, where there was a doctor who had studied back east. The doctor examined Penelope and declared her in excellent health, the baby growing strong and well, due to arrive sometime in early August. Make sure she gets plenty of rest in the last few months, the doctor told Liam. And she should not be doing any heavy lifting or hard labor. I would recommend staying near a town for the birth, just in case there are complications. Liam's face had gone pale. Complications? It is just a precaution, the doctor said kindly. But childbirth can be unpredictable and you are quite isolated up in those hills. Better to be safe. They talked it over that night in their hotel room, and Liam made his decision. We will stay in Hayes City until the baby is born. I can rent a room, find some work to tide us over. Once you and the baby are strong enough to travel, we will go back to the cabin. But the cabin is our home, Penelope protested, and we will lose the whole summer season if you are not up there trapping and hunting. I do not care about the summer season. I care about you and our baby being safe. His voice was firm. This is not up for discussion, Penny. I will not risk you. She knew better than to argue when he used that tone. Besides, deep down, she was relieved. The thought of giving birth in the isolated cabin with no help nearby had been frightening, even if she had not wanted to admit it. They returned to Hayes City and rented a small room above the general store. It was cramped and hot, and nothing like their cabin in the hills, but Liam made it as comfortable as he could, hanging curtains for privacy and building Penelope a chair with cushions so she could sit comfortably despite her growing belly. He found work at the livery stable, using his strength and his knowledge of animals to earn a steady wage. It was not what he was used to, being around people all day, being in town with its noise and crowds, but he bore it without complaint because it meant Penelope would be safe when her time came. As summer deepened and Penelope's belly grew round and tight, she spent her days sewing baby clothes from the soft fabric Liam bought for her. She made tiny gowns and little caps, blankets and cloth diapers, each stitch filled with love and hope. The other women in town began to warm to her once they saw she was respectably married, and a few even stopped by to offer advice and hand-me-down baby things. In late July, the heat became oppressive, and Penelope grew uncomfortable and restless. Her back ached constantly, her ankles swelled, and she could not find a position that felt right for sleeping. Liam did everything he could to help, bringing her cool water, rubbing her feet, sitting up with her in the middle of the night when she could not sleep. "I am sorry," she said one night, feeling guilty about keeping him awake. "I know you have to work in the morning. Do not apologize." He settled his big hand on her belly, and they both felt the baby kick against his palm. "You are growing our child. That is the hardest work there is." The baby came on a hot August night, 2 weeks earlier than the doctor had predicted. Penelope woke to cramping pains and knew immediately what was happening. Liam fetched the doctor while the landlady stayed with Penelope, and by the time he returned, the pains were coming hard and fast. The birth was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Penelope had never known pain like this, waves of it that made her cry out despite her attempts to stay quiet. But Liam stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement even when she was sure she could not go on. "You can do this," he kept saying. "You are the strongest person I know. Just a little more, Penny, just a little more." And finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, the baby came into the world with a lusty cry. The doctor cleaned the infant quickly and handed the squalling bundle to Penelope. "A boy," he said with a tired smile. "A healthy baby boy." Penelope looked down at her son through tears of exhaustion and joy. He had a shock of dark hair and his father's strong features, and when he opened his eyes to look at her, they were the same gold brown as Liam's. Liam leaned over them both, his face full of wonder, and touched the baby's tiny hand with one massive finger. "He is perfect," Liam said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are both perfect." They named him Thomas after Liam's father and called him Tommy. He was a good baby, strong and healthy, and he grew quickly on Penelope's milk. Liam was a devoted father, getting up in the night to walk with Tommy when he fussed, changing diapers without complaint, sitting for hours just watching his son sleep with an expression of awe on his face. 6 weeks after the birth, when Penelope had recovered her strength and the doctor pronounced them both fit to travel, they packed up their things and returned to the cabin in the hills. It was early October, and the aspens were turning gold again, and Penelope felt like she was coming home after a long journey. Liam had used some of his savings to hire men to build an addition to the cabin while they were gone. There was now a separate bedroom with real glass windows and a wooden floor, and the main room had been expanded to include a proper kitchen area with a cast iron stove. The cradle sat beside their new bed, and Penelope's blue dress hung on a peg on the wall. "You like it?" Liam asked, watching her reaction anxiously. "I love it." Penelope turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. "It is perfect. It is home." They settled into a new rhythm, this time as a family of 3. Liam continued his trapping and hunting, but he stayed closer to the cabin now, unwilling to be gone for long with Penelope and Tommy there. Penelope managed the household and cared for Tommy, and in the evenings they would sit together by the fire, Liam holding his son while Penelope mended or sewed, and talk about their plans for the future. "I want to buy some land," Liam said one night. "File a proper claim and make this place legally ours. Maybe expand the cabin even more, build a barn, get some livestock, make this a real homestead." "Can we afford that? If I have a good season this winter and if the prices for pelts stay high, we can. It will take time, but we can do it." "Then let us do it." Penelope smiled at him over Tommy's sleeping head. "Let us build something that will last, something we can pass down to our children. Our children, you want more, do not you?" "Yes." His smile was slow and warm. "Yes, I want a whole house full of them if you are willing." 2 years later, Penelope gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose. She had her mother's dark hair and delicate features, but her father's strength and stubborn will. 2 years after that came another son, Samuel, who was quiet and thoughtful from the day he was born. And 2 years after that, twin girls, Lucy and Laura, who came into the world squalling and did not stop until they were old enough to run around causing mischief. Liam filed his land claim and expanded the cabin into a proper house, with bedrooms for all the children and a big kitchen where Penelope could cook for her growing family. He built a barn and bought chickens and a milk cow, and later, a few pigs and a team of horses. The homestead grew and prospered, and so did their family. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Liam brought Penelope a gift wrapped in brown paper. She opened it to find a length of beautiful green silk, finer than anything she had ever seen. "I want to make you another dress," he said. "Something special, to replace the blue one that is getting worn now." Penelope looked at her husband, this man who had saved her when she had nothing, who had measured her himself and sewed her a dress by candlelight all those years ago, who had given her a home and a family and a life beyond anything she could have imagined. "I love you," she said, the words still feeling new and precious even after all this time. "I love you too." He pulled her close, and even with 5 children running around the house making noise, it felt like they were the only 2 people in the world. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond." That night, after the children were asleep, Liam measured Penelope for the new dress just like he had the first time, his big hands careful and gentle on her body. But now there was familiarity in his touch, the easy intimacy of two people who knew each other completely. And later, after they had made love in their bed with the moonlight streaming through the window, Penelope lay in his arms and thought about how far they had come. She had arrived in Hayes City with nothing but a blood-stained dress that had never fit and a heart full of desperation. Now she had a home, a husband who loved her more than life itself, children who filled her days with joy and chaos, and a future that stretched out before her full of promise. "What are you thinking about?" Liam murmured, his voice sleepy. "How lucky I am, how grateful. I am the lucky one." He kissed her forehead. "You gave me everything, Penny. A reason to come out of the mountains, a family, a life worth living. Before you, I was just surviving. Now I am living." Penelope turned in his arms and kissed him properly, trying to put everything she felt into it. When they broke apart, she whispered, "We saved each other, I think." "Yes," he agreed. "Yes, I think we did." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and new challenges. Tommy grew into a strong, responsible young man who loved the mountains as much as his father did. Rose became beautiful and spirited, with a gift for healing that made her invaluable when anyone in the family got sick or hurt. Samuel turned out to have a head for numbers and helped manage the homestead's finances, making sure they always had enough put by for hard times. The twins, Lucy and Laura, were inseparable and caused twice the mischief of any normal children, but they also brought twice the laughter. When Penelope was 42 and thought her childbearing years were behind her, she found herself pregnant one last time. The baby was another boy, born when his oldest brother was already thinking about starting his own family. They named him William, and he became the baby of the family, doted on by his older siblings and adored by his parents. Liam's hair started going gray at the temples, and lines appeared around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But to Penelope, he was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. Her own dark hair gained silver threads, and her hands became rough from years of hard work. But when Liam looked at her, his eyes still held the same warmth and desire they had on that first night when he had measured her for a dress. On their 25th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the homestead for a celebration. Tommy and his wife brought their 3 children. Rose came with her husband, a doctor from Salina, and their 2 daughters. Samuel arrived from Hayes City, where he worked at the bank, bringing his fiancée to meet everyone. The twins, still unmarried and still inseparable, helped Penelope cook a feast while young William ran around underfoot trying to help. As the sun set, and the family sat around the long table Liam had built, eating and laughing and telling stories, Penelope looked at her husband and felt her heart swell with gratitude. She thought about that desperate girl who had walked into Hayes City with nothing, who had been saved by a mountain man with gentle hands and a kind heart. She thought about the dress he had sewn for her, the first thing that had ever fit properly, the first sign that someone saw her and cared enough to make something just for her. "Penny," Liam's voice pulled her from her reverie. "You all right?" "Yes." She smiled at him across the table full of their children and grandchildren. "I was just thinking about how blessed we are, how rich our life has been. The richest." He raised his glass. "To my wife, who made me the luckiest man alive when she agreed to stay in my cabin all those years ago. To 25 years of marriage and to 50 more if God wills it." Everyone raised their glasses and drank, and Penelope felt tears sting her eyes, but they were happy tears. Later, after the children and grandchildren had gone to bed in the various rooms and outbuildings, Penelope and Liam walked out to stand on the porch of their home. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the wind carried the scent of pine and sage from the hills. "You ever regret it?" Penelope asked quietly. Giving up your solitary life in the mountains for all this noise and chaos. Never. Liam wrapped his arm around her shoulders. Not for a single moment. You and our family are the best things that ever happened to me, Penny. I would choose this life 1,000 times over. Me too. She leaned into his solid warmth. I never owned a dress that fit until I met you. I never had a home or a family or anyone who really saw me. You gave me all of that. You gave me just as much. More even. He turned her to face him, his big hands cupping her face just like he had that first time in the cabin. I love you, Penelope Keller. I have loved you since the day you stood in the street in Hayes City looking so fierce and desperate and brave. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. I love you too, Liam. Always. They kissed there on the porch of their home, surrounded by the sleeping forms of their family under the vast Kansas sky, and Penelope thought that this was what a happily ever after looked like. Not a single perfect moment, but 1,000 imperfect ones strung together into a life, each day a choice to love and be loved, to build something lasting with scarred hands and hopeful hearts. The years continued their steady march. More grandchildren were born, and then great-grandchildren. The homestead became a gathering place for the extended family, a solid anchor in the changing world. Liam eventually handed over the day-to-day running of the place to Tommy, though he still went out to check his trap lines in the winter, moving slower but just as sure. Penelope spent her later years teaching her granddaughters to sew and cook, passing down the recipes and skills she had learned over a lifetime. She still had the blue dress Liam had made her, though it was worn now and carefully preserved in a trunk. She had also kept the green silk dress he had made for their 10th anniversary, and sometimes she would take them out and run her fingers over the careful stitches, remembering the feel of his big hands measuring her, the concentration on his face as he worked by candlelight. When Liam was 73, he took a fall while checking his traps and broke his hip. The injury healed, but it left him unable to walk long distances, and he finally had to accept that his days of roaming the mountains were over. Penelope expected him to chafe at the restriction, to grow bitter and restless, but instead, he seemed content to sit on the porch and watch his grandchildren play, to work on small projects in the barn, to spend long evenings by the fire with his wife. I have had a good run, he told Penelope one night as they sat together in the chairs he had built for them, his hand holding hers. I have seen things and done things and lived a life that was fuller than I ever dreamed, and I got to spend it with you. That is more than most men can say. We are not done yet, Penelope said firmly. We have years left. I hope so. He squeezed her hand. But if not, I want you to know that I have no regrets. You made my life complete, Penny, you and our family. They did have more years, as it turned out. Liam lived to see his 80th birthday, still sharp-minded and quick-witted even if his body had slowed down. He died peacefully in his sleep one winter night, with Penelope beside him as she had been for 53 years of marriage. The grief was crushing, a physical weight that made it hard for Penelope to breathe. But she was surrounded by love, by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who had all been touched by Liam's quiet strength and gentle kindness. They buried him on a hillside overlooking the homestead, with a view of the mountains he had loved, and Penelope stood at the graveside and told him all the things she wished she had said one more time. She lived another 7 years after Liam died, cared for by her children, surrounded by family. And when her own time came, on a soft spring morning with the aspens beginning to bud, she went peacefully, with a smile on her face. They buried her next to Liam on the hillside, and her children made sure that both headstones were carved with the words they had spoken to each other so many times over the years. I love you. Always. The homestead remained in the family for generations, a testament to what two people could build when they chose to love each other through all the hard and beautiful moments of a life. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right, the people who lived there swore they could feel the presence of Liam and Penelope, still watching over the land they had claimed and the family they had created. The blue dress was eventually donated to a museum in Hays City, a relic of the early days of Kansas settlement. It sat in a glass case with a small plaque that told the story of a mountain man who had sewn a dress by candlelight for a desperate young woman, and how that simple act of kindness had grown into a love story that lasted more than half a century. Visitors would stop and read the plaque, and some of them would smile, touched by the idea that something as simple as a dress that finally fit could be the beginning of everything. They would look at the careful stitches, the faded blue fabric, and they would understand that sometimes the greatest love stories are not the ones that start with grand gestures and dramatic declarations, but the ones that begin with quiet acts of care, with seeing someone truly and choosing to meet their needs. And so the story of Liam Keller and Penelope Owens lived on, passed down through generations, a reminder that love could be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes all it took was someone willing to measure you carefully and sew something that finally fit.